For 40 years, his canvas was a chalkboard, and his medium was dust. His name was Arthur Pembroke, and for 4 decades, he was a history teacher at Northwood High. He was a good one, the kind of teacher students remembered long after they'd forgotten the dates of forgotten wars. He didn't just teach history, he painted it with words, making the past feel vibrant and alive in a classroom that smelled of old books and fluorescent lights. His life was a quiet composition of duty and love. He was a dedicated husband to his wife, Sarah, a loving father to his 2 children, and a respected figure in his small town. He built a life, a solid, dependable, good life. But beneath the surface of this well-ordered existence, a different life lay dormant, packed away in a dusty corner of his memory. Long before the chalk dust, there was the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. As a young man in college, Arthur wasn't a history major, he was an artist, a gifted one. His professors saw a rare talent in him, a unique ability to capture not just a likeness, but a feeling, a mood, a story with his brush. He had a scholarship offer to a prestigious art institute in Chicago, a future shimmering with possibility. But then he met Sarah, and the future he saw with her was brighter, more real than any imagined life in a cold city studio. He made a choice. He chose love. He chose family. He chose the steady, reliable path of a teacher. The paintbrushes were packed away in a wooden box, the dream gently laid to rest. He never regretted his choice, not for a moment. But sometimes, on a quiet afternoon, he would see the way the light fell across an old barn, or the complex tapestry of wrinkles on an elderly friend's face, and a ghost of an impulse would stir within him, a silent ache for a conversation he had long since abandoned. When he retired at the age of 67, the structure of his life dissolved. The morning bell no longer rang. The students' faces were gone. The chalkboard was wiped clean for the last time. The silence in his house, once a welcome reprieve, now felt vast and empty. He found himself adrift in a sea of unstructured days. The spark came not as a lightning bolt, but as a quiet discovery. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, a year into his retirement. He was cleaning out the attic, a task he had put off for years, wading through a lifetime of accumulated memories. And there, under a pile of old yearbooks, he saw it. A dark mahogany box, its brass latch tarnished with age. His old paint box. He ran a hand over the scratched surface, his fingers tracing the faint initials he had carved into it so long ago. He didn't open it right away. He just sat there, on the dusty floor of the attic, the sound of the rain drumming a soft rhythm on the roof. When he finally lifted the lid, a scent, a ghost of a forgotten life, rose up to meet him, the sharp, clean smell of turpentine and the rich, earthy aroma of oil paints. Most of the tubes were hard as rock, the bristles of the brushes stiff and splayed. But a few colors, tucked away in the corners, were still soft. He picked up a tube of ultramarine blue, the color of a twilight sky, and squeezed a tiny bead onto his thumb. He didn't decide to become an artist that day. He just decided to try to fill the silence. He set up a small easel in a spare bedroom, the light from the window his only companion. He didn't know what to paint, so he painted the only thing he could see, the view from his window. A gnarled oak tree, its bare branches reaching like skeletal fingers into the gray autumn sky. The first strokes were clumsy, uncertain. His hand had forgotten the language of the brush, but he persisted. And slowly, tentatively, something began to reawaken. The first few months were a quiet, personal struggle. Arthur fought against the rust of 40 years, his hands feeling like clumsy strangers. His early canvases were a collection of frustrations, paintings that failed to capture the images in his mind. He would work for hours, only to scrape the canvas clean in disappointment. But with each failure, he learned. He was a teacher, after all, and he became his own most patient student. He wasn't trying to recapture the artist he had been at 20. That young man was gone. He realized he couldn't paint with the fire and fury of youth. Instead, he began to paint with something else, something only a lifetime could provide: wisdom. His subjects were not grand or dramatic. He painted the things his quiet life had taught him to see. He painted Sarah's hands, weathered and beautiful as she tended to her garden, each wrinkle a line in a love story. He painted an old abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town, not just the decaying wood and broken windows, but the profound loneliness that clung to it like ivy. He painted portraits of his old friends, not flattering likenesses, but honest, unflinching studies of time itself, capturing the laughter and sorrow etched into their faces. His style was unique, a blend of realism and a soft, dreamlike quality. He used light not just to illuminate, but to reveal emotion. A single shaft of sunlight falling on a worn armchair could evoke a lifetime of quiet afternoons. The spare bedroom transformed from a place to pass the time into a sanctuary, a studio where he was more himself than he had been in decades. He painted for himself, a silent dialogue between his memories and the canvas. He had no intention of ever showing his work to anyone. It was too personal, a private conversation. The discovery, when it came, was an accident. His daughter, Olivia, a graphic designer who lived in the city, came home for a weekend visit. She walked into the spare room to find her father and stopped dead in her tracks. The room was filled with canvases, dozens of them, leaning against the walls, propped on chairs. She saw the portrait of her mother's hands, and her breath caught in her throat. She saw the landscapes imbued with a quiet, powerful melancholy. She saw a lifetime of unspoken feelings rendered in oil and light. "Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I had no idea." He was embarrassed, dismissive. "Oh, it's just a hobby, something to keep an old man busy." But Olivia saw more than a hobby. She saw a voice. Without telling him, she took a high-quality photo of one of his paintings, the old abandoned farmhouse, and posted it on her professional Instagram account, a place followed by artists, designers, and gallery owners. She wrote a simple caption: "My 68-year-old father, a retired history teacher, just started painting again. I think he's got something to say." The post didn't go viral in the modern sense, but it resonated. It was shared within small, influential art circles. A week later, Olivia received an email. It was from a woman named Isabel Moreau, the owner of a respected contemporary art gallery in the city. The email was short and to the point. "The painting your father made has a soul. I need to see more." When Olivia told her father, he was terrified. He refused. "I'm not an artist," he insisted. "I'm a retired teacher who messes around with paint." But Olivia, and later, even Isabel herself, were persistent. Isabel drove 2 hours to his small town, sat in his makeshift studio, and listened to him talk about his life and his work. "Arthur," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "a 20-year-old can paint a technically perfect building. Only you can paint the soul of that building. This isn't a hobby. This is your life's work, and it's just beginning. Let's give it a voice. Let's give you your first show." The idea of an exhibition was paralyzing for Arthur. To expose these intensely personal works, these quiet conversations with his past, to the judgment of strangers felt like a violation. The fear of failure, of ridicule, was immense. He was a 70-year-old man about to step onto a stage for the very first time. But with the steady encouragement of his family and Isabel, he slowly, reluctantly agreed. The months leading up to the show were a whirlwind. Isabel helped him select the strongest pieces, framing them in simple, elegant wood that complemented their rustic honesty. Arthur wrote an artist's statement, not filled with academic jargon, but with simple, heartfelt words about rediscovering a lost language. The night of the opening was a blur of anxiety. He stood in a corner of the bright, minimalist gallery, a world away from his dusty studio, feeling like an imposter. The gallery was filled with a sophisticated city crowd, people in stylish black clothes, sipping wine and speaking in hushed, critical tones. He watched as they moved from painting to painting, their faces unreadable. He was sure they saw what he saw, the flaws, the uncertainties, the amateur. But then he started to notice something strange. People weren't just glancing, they were lingering. He saw a young woman with pink hair standing in front of the portrait of his wife's hands, her eyes filled with tears. He saw an elderly man staring at the painting of the abandoned farmhouse, a look of profound, distant memory on his face. They weren't just seeing paint on a canvas, they were seeing their own stories, their own memories, their own feelings reflected back at them. A young art critic, known for his sharp, often cynical reviews, approached him. Arthur braced himself. "Mr. Pembroke," the critic began, his voice surprisingly soft, "I spend my days looking at art that shouts. Your work whispers, and I haven't heard anything so loud in years." It was in that moment that the 40 years of silence, the years of being a teacher, a husband, a father, coalesced into a single point of understanding. His art was powerful not in spite of his life, but because of it. His seeding of the dream hadn't been a loss, it had been an incubation. He had spent a lifetime gathering the stories, the emotions, the wisdom, and only now did he have the language to express them. Later that evening, a small red dot appeared next to the painting of the farmhouse. It had sold. Then another red dot, and another. By the end of the night, more than half of the works were sold. Arthur Pembroke, the retired history teacher, was a sold-out, critically acclaimed artist. He had found his second act, not by starting over, but by finally completing a circle he had left open half a century ago. Today, he still paints in his quiet studio, but he is no longer just filling a silence. He is speaking, in a voice rich with the texture of a life fully lived, a voice that reminds us all that a passion, no matter how long it has been dormant, never truly dies. It just waits for a hand to reach out and reawaken its brush. Arthur's story is a beautiful reminder that our most meaningful chapters can be written at any age. What is the passion, the dream, the quiet whisper you've kept locked away waiting for the right moment? We would be honored to read your story in the comments below. To discover more legends who prove it's never too late, consider joining our community by subscribing.